What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there. Today we're talking about quarterbacks that we're going to start and sit here for week 2 fantasy football. No one's freaking out, right? Just go ahead and be cool, calm, collected, and make sure you're joining us over on Prize Picks. A lot of people here as of late been coming over to Prize Picks and winning some money, and that's what it's all about. If you haven't created an account just yet, make sure you do so using the referral code Headliners. All you gotta do, deposit $10. See if you like it or not. We'll have a deposit match for you up to $100, so you can have some money to play with as well. It's a lot of fun. Don't miss out. Just make sure you use that referral code Headliners when you sign up. But now is time to dive into the information, and the first matchup up is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers and Kansas City Chiefs. A great game here on Thursday Night Football. In fact, this is going to be my Manscaped matchup of the week as well. Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes, two of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. Looking forward to this game. Make sure you head over to manscaped.com as soon as this video is over. Get yourself 20% off and free shipping using the code word Headliners. Don't miss out on that. But this game is going to be a lot of fun to watch. We'll start off with Justin Herbert. He's coming off a week in which he finished as quarterback 5 overall, threw for 279 yards and 3 touchdowns. Yet didn't even really include Mike Williams or Austin Eckler that much, so you know we haven't even seen the ceiling here as of yet. In fact, he only threw the ball 34 times last week. Pretty efficient overall, but we know he has room to improve here this week. The Kansas City defense just allowed 23 fantasy points last week to the quarterback position, but what happens with Keenan Allen? More than likely, we're not going to have him here this week. Now, he hasn't officially been ruled out at the time of this recording, but he's highly unlikely with it being a Thursday game, so we may not have him. Does that mean more Mike Williams? Does that mean more Austin Eckler? I know their owners are really hoping for that, and so am I. In a game that could be a potential shootout, I love the potential ceiling here of Justin Herbert. Obviously, he's going to be a start for you here this week, and same goes for Patrick Mahomes. You're not sitting Patrick Mahomes. The guy started off so hot last week, basically had 360 yards and 5 touchdowns in what felt like the first half. They came out crazy hot against the Arizona Cardinals, whose defense is not that great, but we talked about this past offseason. I even mentioned that at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if Patrick Mahomes is better now without Tyreek Hill, because he's not having to force feed him the ball. Not feel like he has to. Now he can spread it around, be a little bit more free, and we saw what that could potentially look like just this last week, and it looked pretty freaking good. Had 39 attempts. You know Patrick Mahomes is going to be throwing the ball a lot. Going up against the Chargers, a more difficult challenge for them here this week. They allowed 16.8 fantasy points last week. No major injuries, though, to worry about here for the Chiefs. But what could happen to the numbers of Patrick Mahomes if he was forced to throw for all 4 quarters? We didn't get to see it last week. We might this week, and it could be another big number. You know you're starting Patrick Mahomes. How about we move on to Sunday football now? And we'll kick it off with the Miami Dolphins and Baltimore Ravens. First for the Dolphins in Tua Tagovailoa. Had a pretty solid week 1, 270 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 17 fantasy points, took care of the football, wasn't forcing it down the field, wasn't asked to do too much. And that's kind of what I see a lot this year from Tua. The one number that may fluctuate from week to week is the touchdowns. A couple big plays here or there, like we saw from Jalen Waddle last week, is definitely going to boost that ceiling for Tua. Now, last week, they threw the ball 33 times, which is honestly a pretty good sign of things to come, right? If he was going to be down in the 20s, I was going to be a little bit worried, but the 30-plus number is what we're looking for. Going up against Baltimore, last week they allowed 15.3 fantasy points in week 1, but that was against the Jets and Joe Flacco, so I don't want to make it seem like it's some super difficult matchup this week, but the Baltimore Ravens are a little bit banged up. I know, it's the Ravens, but it seems like they get banged up every single year. Defensive back Kyle Fuller is now out. Marcus Peters, questionable for this week. What is this secondary going to look like? That's definitely something to pay attention to, because if they're missing those key pieces, Tua could have himself a pretty solid week. No major injuries in Miami to worry about, but the X factor is this. When you have guys like Waddle and Hill, it only takes 2 or 3 plays an entire game to boost the entire ceiling of one Tua Tagovailoa. The floor is going to be safe weekly. If we can get some of these big plays, especially this week, Tua could pop off again here. He's a start, not an overall smash start, but came in with a score of 18 out of 25. Next up, Lamar Jackson. Obviously, we know we're starting Lamar Jackson. He had a nice game in week 1, but the rushing upside wasn't really there. But he did have 3 passing touchdowns, which is definitely a plus for us here in fantasy football. He was super efficient as well. Only 30 pass attempts, only completed 17 of them. 3 of them were for touchdowns. Now, going up against Miami, their defense looked pretty good in week 1, only allowed 9.5 fantasy points to Mac Jones and the New England Patriots, but it's Mac Jones, it's the Patriots offense. It's not overly terrifying when you think of a passing attack, so expectations are somewhat tempered there. For injuries, it's the offensive line. Ronnie Stanley. They lost Jawan James. What about J.K. Dobbins? Does he return this week? This is a team that's already starting to rack up the injuries, and that's a little bit to be worried about in Baltimore. Now, the ability for Lamar Jackson to take over a game with his legs and having multiple big play wide receivers, like we saw this past week with Devin Duvernay and Rashad Bateman. We didn't even really see much Mark Andrews. What happens when he really gets involved? The ceiling's only going to get higher. There's still room for improvement, and Lamar Jackson going to be a start. How about we go down to the Cleveland Browns and New York Jets? Now, started off with Joe Flacco. Now, he had 307 yards and a touchdown. That's not horrible, but is that really sustainable for Joe Flacco? He had to throw the ball 59 times. That is not ideal. If you're out there throwing the ball 59 times in regulation, it's not a good sign for your fantasy team. There's no way they can continue that each and every week. They have to start utilizing their running backs a little bit more. Now a matchup going up against Cleveland, who allowed 19 fantasy points to Baker Mayfield last week. But if you take away that one busted coverage play, that one big touchdown that went to Robbie Anderson, the numbers are going to look a lot different. So make sure you don't put too much stock into that. No major injuries for them to worry about, but a lack of offensive identity, that is a problem for the Jets. When Corey Davis out-targets Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson, it's a little bit weird. You got to change that up, Jets. You got to go and give it to the horses that you got in the draft and let them help you make big plays. Not starting Joe Flacco here this week. Jacoby Brissett, nope, not doing this one either. 147 yards and 1 touchdown just isn't enough to crack my fantasy lineup, and probably not yours either. He did have 34 pass attempts, not many that were great. Amari Cooper was open the entire game and just couldn't get the ball thrown his way. The Jets allowed 21 fantasy points just last week. How about the return of offensive tackle Jack Conklin? Is that possible for the Browns? It is. I think that really affects the running game more than it does Jacoby Brissett, though. This is a run first, second, and third offense. That's where the points are going to be, is the running game. I'm not starting Jacoby Brissett. How about we go out to Detroit for the Washington Commandos, Detroit Lions, Carson Wentz. Look at the rebirth of Carson Wentz. Quarterback 3 overall, 313 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, did have the 2 interceptions, but then also added 12 rushing yards and a 2-point conversion. This dude really needs to thank Jahan Dotson. I talked about Jahan Dotson a lot this offseason, and even though he didn't get a lot of volume, you saw his playmaking ability, and that could lead to good things for Washington. He was one of only 7 quarterbacks that threw the ball over 40 times in week 1, so that's a good sign. Going up against the Lions, who just allowed over 24 fantasy points to the quarterback position. No major injuries, and it's that ability of Jahan Dotson that's going to bump up the X factor a little bit for me. Terry McLaurin has constantly been the guy that defenses really had to worry about. This past week, we saw Antonio Gibson involved in the passing game. We saw Jahan Dotson make some absolutely crazy catches, and it's really exciting me for what we could see in Washington. In fact, I'm going to head over to Prize Picks right now, and I'm going to smash the over on Carson Wentz, which is currently set at 235.5 passing yards. I think he eclipses that in a decent matchup this week against the Detroit Lions. For them, you got Jared Goff. Last week, 215 yards, 2 touchdowns. Kind of what I expect from Goff. The touchdown's a little bit of a surprise. I don't know if I can expect that every single week from Jared Goff. It was barely enough to even get him into the top 20 this week. He did throw the ball 37 times, though, which is a solid number. Washington in week 1, though, only allowed 14 fantasy points to the opposing quarterback. No major injuries, though, to be worried about in Detroit. It's really a high-end pass-catching running back here in Detroit that's going to help boost this in DeAndre Swift. It's a team that's always going to be fighting for the lead. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot each and every week. They need the touchdowns, though, because if the touchdowns aren't there, you're just not going to get the amount of volume that you need, because the Lions are still the Lions, even though they do look a little better. Can the Lions get to 500 this year? If you think so, let me know down below in the comment section. But for this week, no, we're not starting Jared Goff just yet. Let's go down to Jacksonville now. Indianapolis Colts, Jacksonville Jaguars, Matt Ryan first. 352 yards passing and a touchdown was good to see in week 1. They had 1 interception and 1 fumble. That hurt a little bit. He did have 50 pass attempts, which is absolutely crazy to think about. In an Indianapolis offense, 50 pass attempts. We haven't seen numbers like that since like Andrew Luck days. Huge volume for Matt Ryan. Going up against the Jags, who allowed over 30 fantasy points to the quarterback position last week. No major injuries to be concerned of, but I can't bump up the X factor too much because despite all the pass attempts in week 1, this is still a Jonathan Taylor first offense. I expect Indianapolis to bounce back this week, maybe throw the ball a little bit less, control the time of possession, and really utilize Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines on the ground. However, there's enough volume there that even if they scale this back 10 to 15 pass attempts, that we still could see Matt Ryan with a solid day and a good matchup, so he's a start for me. As for Trevor Lawrence, after what we saw from him last year, I was just glad to see him get a touchdown. There were so many games last year where he just got shut out each and every week. So to see him get that touchdown this week in week 1, I like to see that. Should have been 2, though, right? Because Travis Etienne dropped one on the goal line. He did throw the ball over 40 times, but that drop touchdown really brought his numbers down a little bit. Really wish he could have gotten that, but it just didn't work out that way. Now a difficult matchup going up against the Indianapolis Colts, who just allowed 16 fantasy points last week to the position. No major injuries here, though, for Trevor Lawrence. I still haven't really seen this guy prove it to me consistently that he can throw multiple touchdowns in a week. And that's what we're looking for in fantasy football, right? It's either got to be crazy high rushing upside or multiple touchdowns weekly. We haven't seen that consistently from Trevor Lawrence. And until we do, he's going to remain even though he did look a little bit better having more weapons this past week. How about we go down to New Orleans for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, New Orleans Saints. First up, Tom Brady. We saw Tom Brady struggle in week 1. He played a super tough defense there in Dallas, though. It's going to take a little bit of time for him to get on the same page as these receivers. Remember, Russell Gage, Julio Jones, new faces, Chris Godwin already dealing with a hamstring injury. We know about Mike Evans, but Mike Evans has struggled against the Saints at times. Do we see a lot more Julio Jones this week? I expect some improvement in this passing game when it comes to volume. Only 27 pass attempts in week 1. I definitely expect that number to climb. He was the only quarterback last year that averaged over 40 pass attempts per game. If the Tampa Bay Buccaneers want to be what they are, they have to throw the ball more, so I expect that number to bump up here this week. Going against the Saints, last week allowed 20 fantasy points to the position in week 1, but offensive line is a concern here in Tampa Bay for me. They lost Donovan Smith, their starting left tackle, and he is definitely somebody who was the protector of Tom Brady. And now without him, we got some concern. This offensive line was already beat up. Then you lose another starter on top of it. We're going to have to start looking for some very quick routes, get very creative, maybe a lot more dump-off passes to Leonard Fournette coming around the corner. Plus, we know Chris Godwin already dealing with another hamstring injury. Who knows what that's going to look like coming off of the torn ACL as well. Not a big surprise there, though, right? I mean, we've talked about this for multiple years. When a player has a reconstructed ACL, they take that from the hamstring. So a lot of times, players that are rehabbing ACLs tend to have hamstring injuries, kind of like we're seeing with Chris Godwin. And then lastly, the X factor, it has to be Julio Jones, right? He actually looked pretty good. And what I would like to call a Diet Debo role, right? Because it was nowhere near Debo Samuel, but it was great to see him take some jet sweeps, some looks out of the backfield. He looked pretty good on the field, a lot better than he looked in Tennessee. He could definitely fill in that wide receiver 2 role nicely if Chris Godwin is going to miss some time. So even though the ceiling's brought down here temporarily for Tom Brady, he's still going to be a start. And then going against Jameis Winston, and I'm sure all the Saints fans are going to be in the comments. They have to be. It seems like this year, the touchiest fan base that there is. I'm not talking any crap about the Saints players. I'm just trying to keep it real a little bit here and say, hey, I need to see some consistency. And until I see some consistency, it's really hard. Now, I know that you're out there cheering for your team and you expect the best, 100%, not taking anything away from you. And Jameis had a great week 1, right? But I wanted to see what this offense was going to look like. There's so many new pieces with Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave and Jameis coming off the torn ACL. What was Michael Thomas going to look like? How involved was Taysom Hill going to be? Those were all questions leading into week 1. Now we kind of have a little bit of an idea. Jameis only had to throw the ball 34 times. I would love for him to get up in that 40 range. I mean, I don't know if I want to go much higher than 40 because when we start pushing the ball too much, that's when we could see some interceptions return, but maybe a slight uptick for 34 just because you got so many mouths to feed. But this is going against the Tampa Bay defense, who only allowed 8 fantasy points to the Dallas Cowboys last week in week 1. This is an elite defense. You have an offensive line that is still pretty thin. You have Alvin Kamara, who's dealing with a rib injury, even though it doesn't sound serious and he should play. This is just one of those tough matchups. This is not one of the times that I really want to test fate here in week 2. Now, if Jameis can continue what we saw in week 1, he is definitely somebody that we're going to look at starting as the season progresses. But in week 2, against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I just can't do it yet. Over to New York now for the Giants and the Panthers, and we'll start off with Baker Mayfield. Had 235 yards and a touchdown, but the touchdown was on a busted coverage deep ball to Robbie Anderson. He also rushed for a touchdown. I don't think that's something that we can overly rely upon each and every week. Volume-wise, had 27 pass attempts. Would like to see maybe something closer to 30 to 34 or so in that range. Really get DJ Moore maybe a little bit more involved. Some more volume going the way of CMC, potentially, maybe. Please, Carolina. Going up against the New York Giants, who allowed 19 fantasy points just last week. No overly concerning injuries at this time in Carolina, but it's really limited opportunities. It's less CMC usage. It's big play dependency in this offense that really has to have me lower the X factor for one Baker Mayfield and keep him as a sit for Daniel Jones. Don't be fooled by his top 20 finish. If it wasn't for Saquon Barkley and one big missed tackle touchdown for Sterling Shepard, Daniel Jones would have looked a whole lot worse. He was saved by those two guys right there. Only had 21 pass attempts. That is not enough for a starting quarterback in fantasy football unless you're going to be scrambling a butt ton, which he is not, maybe a little bit, but not a lot. Going up against Carolina, who only allowed 10.9 fantasy points last week, but that was to Jacoby Brissett. Really no major injury concerns here. He's just not in control of his ceiling, if that makes any sense. He needs big plays. With that low volume pass attempt number, he needs big plays to happen consistently. Now, sure, we like Saquon Barkley, but those big plays may come in the running game, not always in the passing game. Can't expect those big passing plays every single week from Sterling Shepard, at least. So for right now, we're going to continue to sit Daniel Jones. How about New England and Pittsburgh? Starting off with Mac Jones. Could never really get anything going in week 1. He had 21 completions for only 213 yards. That is way too dink and dunk for me. Too short of a passing game to really give you an opportunity at bigger volume, bigger numbers. He did have 30 pass attempts, which is at least good to see. Pittsburgh was an absolute turnover machine last week, though. Now no TJ Watt. Expect that defense to maybe take a slight step back, but they're still going to be a ball hawking defense, so it's not the easiest of matchups. Now, the biggest concern here is his back, right? He dealt with back spasms last week, and is that something that's going to limit him here this week? This offense, though, isn't vertical enough. It's not big play enough. It's going to be overly reliant on the running backs more times than not, so he's not going to be somebody that we consider here starting in fantasy football, at least anytime soon. How about Mitchell Trubisky? Or Mitchy Biscuits, if you're feeling fancy. It's just another dink and dunk performance. 21 pass completions for only 194 yards. I can't get on board with that when it comes to fantasy football. Now, he was close to 40 pass attempts, which is good to see. But what do we see going forward with Najee Harris? Whether he's 100% or not. Does he play? Does he miss the ball game? Going up against New England, not an easy task. Last week, their defense only allowed 14.8 fantasy points per game. And really, when it comes to injuries, we know about TJ Watt on the defensive side of things, but it all comes down to Najee. Is he going to be available? If he is, how limited is he going to be? Are the checkdowns going to be there to Najee? Is he not going to be available? And is that going to force Mitchell Trubisky to go deeper down the field to the likes of a Deontay Johnson or Chase Claypool? The offense just is not vertical enough yet for me to really trust wanting to start Mitch Trubisky either. He's really reliant on big plays, and until we start seeing him make those big plays, he just doesn't put up enough fantasy points to be considered here as of yet. He's going to be a sit. How about we go down to LA for the Rams and the Falcons now? And Marcus Mariota had a great week 1. 215 yards passing, 72 yards rushing, and a rushing touchdown. Now, he threw the ball 33 times, and he really spread it around, right? That was great to see. Marcus Mariota played pretty well. This is going to be a more difficult matchup for him, though, going up against the Rams, even though last week they were absolutely torched by Josh Allen. In case you're wondering, Marcus Mariota is not Josh Allen right now. Okay, I'm sorry if I burst anybody's bubble. He's just not yet. There's no major injuries for Atlanta, though, to speak of. The Rams, ability to shut down the rushing upside here of Marcus Mariota is really where I have my concerns. Because where we really made our money from Mariota this past week was that rushing upside. It was that 72 yards and that touchdown on the ground. The Rams should be able to contain that, and that worries me for the potential upside here going forward. Now, if he performs this week, if Marcus Mariota goes out there and puts up another solid week, all of a sudden, starting in week 3, he may be a potential starting option for teams that need it. But until I see him put back-to-back games together to really be productive in fantasy football, he's going to remain a sit. How about for Matthew Stafford? Now, huge letdown in week 1, right? Huge may be an understatement, but we have to give credit to the Buffalo Bills defense, right? I mean, that defense is next level elite. It was the turnovers that really hurt Matthew Stafford in week 1. Plus, there's lots of rust. There's lots of lack of chemistry, I guess you could say as well, between him and the likes of maybe Allen Robinson, who we didn't see him really look his way. He was under pressure so fast, he had no time to think, and he was just going to what he knew best, and that was Cooper Kupp. He still threw the ball over 40 times last week. Atlanta allowed over 21 fantasy points to the quarterback position. How about the return of Van Jefferson? Is that a possibility? Because the elbow issue for Matthew Stafford is not something that I'm overly concerned about right now. The X factor for me is this, though. It's Sean McVay. It's his ability to really make adjustments and get this offense going. He has done it forever. He did it with Jared Goff. He did it last year with Matthew Stafford. More time together equals more chemistry, more potential upside, and I'm still starting Matthew Stafford. Let's go down to San Francisco now for the 49ers and the Seahawks. Geno Smith. Wait a second. Wait 1 second. Is Geno Smith really good? I mean, is he really? 195 yards passing and 2 touchdowns against the Denver Broncos on Monday Night Football. And he looked really good, protected the football, very efficient. And he did it all with only 28 pass attempts, so he wasn't having to throw the ball 50 times. Now he goes up against San Francisco. Kind of hard to really know what San Francisco's defense is going to be like, because when the last time we saw them on the field, they were basically swimming up and down the field. No major injuries right now, though, for Geno Smith. The X factor, I need to see the consistency. I mean, I've mentioned this with a couple other guys, and this is just the way that fantasy football works. I don't want to just blindly say, oh, good game, throw him in your lineup. Oh, bad game, take him out. I'm trying to find the consistency. When we find the consistent producers, it makes our lives so much easier in fantasy football. I want to see if Geno can do it more than once. If he can do it more than once, then I know there's a chance that he can do it again. And that leads it to maybe being a little bit closer to a start. As of right now, even though I like what I saw, I can't start Geno Smith just yet in fantasy football. How about Trey Lance? I'm for sure giving Trey Lance a pass in week 1. That game absolutely sucked. I mean, I'm talking about torrential downpour. They're basically playing on a slip and slide out there, yet Trey Lance still had 164 yards passing, 54 yards rushing, threw the ball 28 times, which I kind of expect him to be hovering right around that 30 mark each and every week. Now going up against Seattle, last week they allowed Russell Wilson to score 17 fantasy points. We don't know yet about George Kittle. We know that we're not going to have Elijah Mitchell. Does that mean that we see even more running from Trey Lance? Sure, they just signed Marlon Mack to their practice squad. The guy that's, rehabbed off of a torn Achilles that got cut by the Houston Texans. Am I overly excited to crown him as the backfield king in San Francisco? No, I'm really not just yet. I expect a lot more rushing upside coming from Trey Lance this week, and he's going to remain a start. Let's go out to Dallas now for the Cowboys and the Bengals. Started off with Joe Burrow, because I don't want to talk about Cooper Rush, if I'm being completely honest. Joe Burrow is one of those quarterbacks that can survive 5 turnovers. Not too many quarterbacks can do that. Last week had 338 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and a fumble, but also added in 47 rushing yards and a 2-point conversion. So that definitely helped his day. He threw the ball 53 times. Am I overly surprised about that? No. Probably not. I mean, when you have the weapons that they have, you have to expect they're going to throw the ball quite a bit. Overtime did somewhat play a part in that, so don't forget about that. Now a matchup going up against Dallas, who's going to have to rely on their defense. Only allowed 11.4 fantasy points to the quarterback position in week 1. Does he have T. Higgins back? If he doesn't, do we see more involvement of Tyler Boyd or maybe even the tight end Hayden Hurst? There's other options in this offense that's not going to limit his potential ceiling. And last but not least, the X factor. Jamar Chase I can't recall if I've seen a second-year wide receiver be as dominant on a play-by-play basis as him. Sure, Justin Jefferson's going to be up there, but dude, Ja'Marr Chase is the truth, and this dude is going to be special, and he bails out Joe Burrow more times than not, and he's going to remain a start for me here is Burrow. As for Cooper Rush, you have Cooper Rush with limited pass-catching weapons, a banged-up offensive line, and a Bengals defense that only allowed 12 fantasy points last week to Mitchie Biscuits. Can't do it. It's going to be a pass on Cooper Rush. Let's go down to Denver now for the Broncos and the Texans, starting off with Davis Mills. And by now, I think we can pretty much say we know what Davis Mills is. He's a solid quarterback. He's got a low ceiling and inconsistent touchdown production, but he's a solid quarterback. Last week, got a little bit lucky. Had 2 touchdowns last week, both of them to O.J. Howard. Who was expecting touchdowns, multiple touchdowns, to O.J. Howard in week 1 for the Houston Texans? Now, he did throw the ball 37 times, which is about pretty normal for them. Going up against Denver, Denver has to be better than what we saw on Monday Night Football. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Geno Smith and the Seattle Seahawks, but that defense in Denver is better than what you just watched on TV, and I expect them to try to get things right back at home here in week 2, so the matchup isn't overly easy for them. There's just not enough scoring opportunities in Houston for me to want to start Davis Mills. Don't dislike the guy. He's definitely doing the most he can with the pieces that he has, but I can't start him for fantasy football. As for Russell Wilson, am I shocked by what happened to the Denver Broncos in Seattle? Yeah, I mean, I kind of am, if I'm being completely honest. 340 yards passing, 1 touchdown. They really utilized the running backs a lot in the backfield, and I expect them to do that once again this week. It was good to see Russell go out there and throw the ball 42 times. That's what we want to see for fantasy football. Houston last week, they allowed 16 fantasy points to the position. No major injuries for Denver. It's really the amount of weekly weapons that Russell has at his disposal. We have Jerry Jeudy. We have Cortland Sutton. We have multiple tight ends, apparently. Javonte Williams. We have Melvin Gordon. Tons of options every single week that, even though there's going to be players that have down weeks, he has enough firepower around him that somebody's going to bail him out weekly and help really give him that safe floor and that high ceiling. So he's going to be a start for me once again in a good matchup here this week. All right, let's go out to Las Vegas for the Raiders and the Cardinals, and we'll start with Kyler Murray, and not a great start for my Arizona Cardinals. Full disclosure, they did not look that good, but Kyler Murray still went out there and put up 20 fantasy points, 193 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 29 yards rushing, and a 2-point conversion really helped raise up his floor for fantasy owners in week 1. Did have 34 pass attempts. The Raiders last week allowed 23 fantasy points to one Justin Herbert. Not that Kyler Murray is Justin Herbert, but you can see that that secondary can be had. What is the likelihood that we see a less limited Zach Ertz this week? Do we get back Rondale Moore? Those are 2 key pieces we're paying attention to, but it's the rushing upside of Kyler Murray. As long as he has that rushing upside that we see every single week, it really helps kind of put our mind at ease that maybe the bad games are very few and far between. Even if he goes out there and only puts up 14 fantasy points, but adds in 30, 40 rushing yards, you're looking at 17, 18 fantasy points, and he didn't kill your fantasy team. So we'd love to have that safe floor, but I have a question for you. Is it just me, or did Kyler look chubby? Dude looked stockier, right? Maybe it was just the red pants. I don't know what it was. Dude looked a little bit thicker to me. I'm throwing that out there. Anyway, he's still a start for me here this week in a good matchup. For Derek Carr, 295 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, but you can tell he loves having himself some Davante Adams. 37 pass attempts for Derek Carr, 17 of them went to Davante Adams. Arizona just got annihilated in the secondary by Patrick Mahomes. No major injuries here. Great matchup once again for Derek Carr. The X factor, I'm kind of looking at Josh Jacobs in this game. I think he has the ability to take a few passes out of the backfield and really help boost the potential ceiling of Derek Carr. We saw that Arizona couldn't stop basically anything last week, and Josh Jacobs' ability to run after the catch could really be beneficial in this game. I like Derek Carr so much, I'm heading over to Prize Picks, and I'm going to smash the over. Currently at 265.5 passing yards. I think that's a number he easily eclipses here on this poor defense in Arizona. Now we got to Green Bay for the Bears and the Packers. We'll start off with Justin Fields because, like with Trey Lance, I'm not holding anything against Justin Fields in that game last week. The weather was just too bad to even remotely try to take anything away from that game. I mean, he still had 121 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, an interception, 28 rushing yards, and the baddest belly slide you've ever seen on grass before. I mean, dude literally looked like he was on a tarp a slip and slide out there. That's how crazy the water was on the field. Really was barely able to throw last week. Green Bay allowed 19 fantasy points last week to Kirk Cousins. Got to give credit to the Minnesota offense, though. They could not contain Justin Jefferson whatsoever. The defense should be slightly improved. I don't expect him to be that bad each and every week. No major injuries that we're watching here, but really, the X factor is the unknown. Similar to so many of the other quarterbacks in this video, I need to see Justin Fields produce not just once, but at least 2 times. I'm trying to find some consistency, some trends that we can really build off of to go forward before I want to trust him in my lineup. The quarterback position is way too deep. There are way too many options out there that are safer at this point than starting Justin Fields in your fantasy lineup. I love the kid. I love what he brings to the table. I want Justin Fields to be a thing from a fan perspective. Trust me, I really do, but I got to be a little bit safe. I have to remove the bias when talking about Justin Fields because it's just not ready to be in your starting lineup just yet. For Aaron Rodgers, not overly excited about Aaron Rodgers here this week. Now, I sure bet Aaron Rodgers didn't enjoy himself in week 1. The passing offense looked horrific in Green Bay. A big touchdown drop by rookie Christian Watson. You know, that really made Aaron Rodgers happy on the inside. He threw the ball 34 times, but they just could not move the chains at all. Now going against Chicago, they only allowed 11 fantasy points last week, but we're not using too much of that in the Tsunami Bowl. Does he get back left tackle David Bakhtiari? Does Allen Lazard return this week? He desperately needs Allen Lazard to return and his left tackle as well. In the meantime, though, they need to go run heavy, so the X factor is going to drop down. They need to utilize A.J. Dillon. They need to utilize more Aaron Jones, but they've already come out and said that here this week. Now, the ceiling is going to be dramatically dropped down for Aaron Rodgers. You have to figure at some point this offense is going to click a little bit, and he's going to improve and fall back into the start category. Until we see those pieces fall into place, though, I don't think I can do it. For right now, Aaron Rodgers is going to be a sit for me. How about we go down to Buffalo for the Bills and the Titans? And I spent a lot of time this offseason talking up Ryan Tannehill. Came out week 1 and basically did as expected. 266 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and a top 12 finish. And did it not looking very sexy. You know what I mean? But he did what he did. Had 33 pass attempts, which is good to see. But now it's a matchup against the Buffalo Bills, and I'm going to be completely honest. This defense scares the bejesus out of me, and I don't think I want to start anyone against them. I mean, I was barely on the fence of wanting to throw Derrick Henry out there. I really don't think I want to throw out Ryan Tannehill. Now, obviously they have some pass-catching weapons in this offense, but I don't think we see enough of that volume here this week to really make that much of a difference, and I'm going to sit Ryan Tannehill. For Josh Allen, I don't care if Josh Allen plays the Bills defense. I'm not sitting Josh Allen ever. I mean, it feels like forever ago, doesn't it, when we watched him on Thursday Night Football against the Rams, where he absolutely shredded them for 297 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and then added 56 yards and a touchdown on the ground, and it only needed 31 pass attempts to do it. Now going up against Tennessee, which should be a better matchup for him, no major injury concerns, the rushing upside, the ability to have playmakers that can not only stretch the field, but move the chains underneath is highly, highly underrated. The complete package in Buffalo, obviously you're starting Josh Allen, and then lastly, you got the Minnesota Vikings, Pittsburgh Steelers for Kirk Cousins. The new look Minnesota offense, looking pretty good, looking a little bit more vertical like we expected, and I like it a lot. Justin Jefferson could not be stopped, and now Adam Thielen has a ton of room for improvement. So many defenses are going to have to start focusing even more on Justin Jefferson vertically down the field. Adam Thielen's going to get a chance. So Kirk Cousins, he had 277 yards passing, 2 touchdowns last week, only needed 32 pass attempts. Now a matchup going up against Philadelphia that Jared Goff didn't look bad against last week. No major injury concerns, and the key for me is going to be Adam Thielen. Bump up the X factor to 3 here because I think he gets utilized this week and really helps take Kirk Cousins to the next level where he's going to be a start. And then lastly, Jalen Hurts, Philadelphia Eagles, no passing touchdowns, but did have 243 yards passing and 90 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown on the ground, finishing inside the top 5. That is like the Jalen Hurts line, isn't it? Somebody left a comment on a video earlier in the week, maybe it was today at some point, I don't remember who said it, like, Jalen Hurts is the type of quarterback that you want to start, but you don't want to watch him play, because he's absolutely terrifying you, because he's not scoring points a lot throughout the game, especially not through the air. He did look pretty good when he was force-feeding A.J. Brown, which is something to pay attention to. 32 pass attempts, now going up against Minnesota, who did look pretty good. The Minnesota defense in week 1 looked pretty legit, and that's somebody we need to pay attention to as well. The X factor here is going to remain the rushing upside. If we do not get the rushing upside from one Jalen Hurts, he will disappoint your fantasy team. Up until this point, nobody can stop him on the ground, so it's going to remain his biggest X factor and keep him a start. All right, there's my quarterback starts and sits for week 2 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you some information so it's a little bit easier for you to make your decision for your fantasy team here this week. If I did, do me a favor, hit that like button, leave a comment down below, and make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. We have you covered with all things informational fantasy football related for the next, 16 and a half weeks. Looking forward to doing that. Gonna get out of here for the day. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.